Well, I'm going to put an interesting observation out here. Who first forewarned us about the military-industrial complex? Actually, there were several people, and I know it was an ignored um, phrase that was not picked up on until many years later in uh, President Dwight D. Eisenhower's farewell address. He talked about and alluded to the military-industrial complex. But he also said other things. If you want total security, go to prison. There you will be fed, clothed, and given the medical care and so on. The only thing lacking is freedom. That's a very good thing to put out there on a billboard, I think, across the country because, when people vote to have the government protect you, you're basically setting up the walls of your own prison. That's really what's going on, and I could say that's particularly what's wrong with the Northeast, or New Jersey metropolitan area, New York metropolitan area, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, particularly the Northeast, but everywhere. Um, and here's Dwight D. Eisenhower again, a people that values, and I'm going to actually tell you about somebody you're going to be very, very surprised to hear, because you all think of him as the arch enemy, but in a lot of ways the guy reveals the truth. But it's not going to be Dwight Eisenhower. We'll get to that in a second. But here's another one from Dwight Eisenhower. A people that values its privileges above its principles soon loses both. And that's 99% of the problem that's going on in the United States, whether it's Republican or Democrat. Because people think we got to vote for more rules and more laws and more government to actually save ourselves from something that might happen to us because we fear the future. We fear to take responsibility. We fear that we want an umbrella over us, so people lose their freedoms. And then again, here's Dwight Eisenhower, military-industrial complex. In the councils of a government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Now, actually, he talked about. There's other people that talked about this before. Even the founding fathers talked about it with, watching, beware of standing armies and that type of stuff. Now, also, we look at Major General Smedley Butler, Marine Corps. He was a two-time Medal of Honor winner, decorated 2 times the Medal of Honor. He openly stated as a military officer, war is a racket. It always has been. It's possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, and surely the most vicious. And if you look back during the time of Woodrow Wilson, that was a time where they had the Federal Reserve Act was enacted, the Income Tax Amendment was passed, and we got involved in World War I to enrich some people at the expense of the general population. Now, I want to get into this guy, J.P. Morgan, and we're going to get onto his quote. But this is not the real quote I was looking at, but it's a quote that's related to something else I'm going to say. A man always has 2 reasons for doing anything: a good reason and the real reason. So just like, I'll give you another example with John D. Rockefeller. He gave $4 million to the women's suffrage movement, who was against also the sale and manufacture of alcohol. That was John D. Rockefeller. Ostensibly, it was because alcohol breaks up the families, it leads to sin, it's the root of all evil, and all that type of stuff. But the real reason for John D. Rockefeller giving money to movements to stop the manufacture and sale of alcohol was because alcohol that was being produced by countryside farmers was being sold to fuel the Model T Ford, and it was in direct competition with his gasoline product that was being sold in the cities through his Standard Oil company, Standard Oils, okay? That's an example. The real reason was he didn't like the competition from the farmers, so he wanted to have alcohol banned and manufacture sale of alcohol banned, because it wasn't just for drinking purposes, it was also used to fuel the Model T Ford, which was prevalent at the time. It could run on gasoline or alcohol. Now, here's another thing from the young J.P. Morgan. This was back, I supported President Lincoln. Now, you're wondering, President Lincoln, what are you talking about? Because you're thinking about J.P. Morgan in 1910 and 1920s. Well, J.P. Morgan was alive and he was a young man during the time of the Civil War. I supported President Lincoln. This is J.P. Morgan talking. I believed his war policy would be the only way to save the country, but I see my mistake. I visited Washington a few weeks ago and saw the corruption of the present administration, and so long as Abe Lincoln and his cabinet are in power, so long will war continue. And for what? For the preservation of the Constitution and the Union? No, but for the sake of politicians and government contractors. So he's basically saying the same thing as Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, Lincoln says, he didn't care about slavery one way or the other. He wanted to preserve the Union, but he still wasn't really telling you the real reason, as J.P. Morgan alluded to. There's a reason they tell you, and then there's a real reason. The real reason was wanted the money coming into the coffers of the United States because it feeds the contractors and the politicians, which are feeding, independent manufacturers put these politicians in power. So you want that money coming into the coffers because maybe in your district you need money to build canals or railroads or whatever, help infrastructure for manufacturing in your northern district. And that is really why he needed to have the taxation of the South continue. And it wasn't even over preserving the Union. It was over keeping the tax money flowing. So this was a quote from J.P. Morgan, American financier and banker, 1864, talking about Abe Lincoln. He was 27 years old at the time. And a lot of people won't find this one out, okay? So, he's actually flat out saying, I know the popular thing is with Abe Lincoln, everybody says the guy was trying to really preserve the Union, not abolish slavery. He couldn't care which way, but it wasn't really about preserving the Union. It was about keeping the tax flow coming into the coffers of the federal government, which was benefiting the manufacturing area in the North, which was who was backing him. And here you see Abe Lincoln with his tall top hat. A lot of people don't even notice the significance of that. They just think it's his style of the day. But basically, the taller your top hat, the more important you were, or the more important you thought you were, or the bigger the ego you had. So if you're a man of everybody, you wouldn't be wearing this hat. I can say that right now. Because that was the thing back in that time period, that you bought a taller hat to make yourself look more important. So he bought the tallest hat going. That's the game. He had an ego. And here's another quote by J.P. Morgan, because I think we're coming up to the economic crash of the century probably, I'm talking 20th and 21st century. Gold is money. Everything else is credit. I wanted to throw that in there at the end because even though it's unrelated to my main point, that J.P. Morgan actually alluded to the military-industrial complex war is a racket theme back in 1864 when he was a young man, when he was 27 years old, when he was talking about Lincoln and his cabinet, because he realized what it was about. Even he brought that out. The guy is actually a lot more honest in some ways than you think. Okay? Even though he's like the arch enemy of many people, because he's the big guy that wanted this and he wanted his rackets going a certain way, sure. But in a lot of ways he's revealing things. And our economic expansion in the United States, not just on the governmental level with government spending, but also on the private level, has been increased. The economic, output has been increased upon the expansion of credit. This is why back in, I think it was September 28, 2009, we almost had a systemic shutdown of the banking system, just narrowly avoided because there wasn't enough money to be injected in the system when people were pulling money out of the money markets. If it happens this time, it's going to be a systemic, at least temporary failure, because like he's saying right here, gold is money, everything else is credit. Just remember that, because you know, that's the game. That's the name of the game. And all the politicians that talk, you know, it's basically could probably put everything they say and comes out of their mouth. Probably you ought to be putting this phrase after anybody who says anything that's a politician. A man always has two reasons for doing anything. A good reason. It's like, you know, we got to do this to save this. We got to do this for that. You know, here's the noble reason. And the real reason. The real reason is usually financial. So, just wanted to put that out. Actually, now I could go back and talk about what happened during the American Revolution, but I do want to mention one person that you probably I don't even know if people even noticed. James Madison was the one that actually wrote the Bill of Rights per se, but. And you know, Thomas Jefferson really is he was the real author of the Declaration of Independence. But there's one unknown out there, probably nobody knows who the hell he is, George Mason. George Mason was actually the one that wrote the Bill of Rights, more or less, because it was already embodied in, I think it was the Virginia State Constitution, and also the ideals that George Mason put forth in Virginia law, or back, you know, when it was a colony, that was taken directly from him by Thomas Jefferson, and his ideas were put into the Declaration of Independence. When James Madison wrote the Bill of Rights, which he was not necessarily an anti-federalist, but it was to satisfy the anti-federalists. All of that came really from George Mason. It's amazing. You know, and he's a guy we never heard of. The reason you haven't heard of George Mason is because he detested politics. And one of his biggest fears was that the Bill of Rights, he figured he failed, because the Bill of Rights, he figured did not adequately protect the freedoms of the American citizens. But could you imagine if there was no Bill of Rights? We'd be living in freaking Nazi Germany by now easily, or Stalin's communist government at its height by now already, if we didn't have the Bill of Rights. But he's quite correct that, because the Bill of Rights, one of the problems too, it's not being taught in school. And I should diverge and tell you a little more, because I was going to put this on a separate video. One of the reasons that even the police aren't the same as they used to be decades ago is because the newer generations of people that go into the police forces are educated in the newer modern day schools, which do not emphasize the Bill of Rights the way they used to. And if you were educated in the 1950s or educated in the 1920s or 1910s, you would know the Bill of Rights thoroughly and what type of government that we have. Today there's more emphasis on Marilyn Monroe or some kind of trivia like that in history books than there is on the Bill of Rights. And that's another reason why sometimes you're wondering why, you know, police don't have it through their head what the hell they're supposed to be doing. It's kind of a side topic. I should put it up probably on a separate video, but just to give you a little wisdom of what's going on. Because one thing leads to another. People are not educated. They don't really know what's going on, or they don't care, as long as they got whatever they got. You know, whatever they want, whatever pleasures they want. It's most people don't care, and that's 99% of the problem. But you know, when you're looking back, you know, a people that values its privileges above its principles soon loses both. This is very applicable to the Americans today. There's no doubt about it. And I could digress far more on this, but pretty much even people that come here, and people, well, I won't digress anymore on that, but that's something to keep in mind. Personally, if I was governor of the state of New Jersey, which kind of makes me want to throw up sometimes when I think back at it, I would put this billboard up every 10 miles on the New Jersey Turnpike and a New Jersey Parkway, and it would be lit up, and it would be in a different color shade, One's like a pastel green, one's a pastel red, one's a pastel blue, one's a pastel yellow or amber. And so people get it through their damn head because that's probably the most communistic socialist state that we have in the country. If people have values, its privileges above its principles soon loses both. And just again, the point of this video was about J.P. Morgan, really. He's the one that really enlightened us early on about the beginnings of the military-industrial complex. Because before the Civil War, the war between the states, or war of northern aggression, more aptly said, there was no real large standing army. And that was really the beginning of it right there. A man always has two reasons for doing anything: a good reason and a real reason. And we know what Abe Lincoln's real reasons were. And J.P. Morgan aptly observed that. His cabinet and himself was all for the sake of the northern politicians and the government contractors. That's what the war was about. It was the military-industrial complex and keeping those tax rolls fulfilled and rolling into the coffers of Washington, D.C. from the South. So I'm a person that is a little bit different on YouTube. The people that don't want to, I can tell you right now, a lot of the people that are in the alternative media, they'll shun away from this flag. But sometimes I like to display it in this way. Don't tread on me, because it gets the message across a lot better than what people have been conditioned, like Pavlov's dogs, to think what the flag really meant with the Southern cause. It was about freedom, the Bill of Rights, the right to self-government, and the right to representative government, and the right not to be taxed, your area to be taxed, so it could be given to another area of the country. So, there you go. Over and out. And I can tell you one thing, 99.99% of the media, alternative media that's out there, especially the big guys, they will not go anywhere near this subject or this flag unless it starts to get more popular. Then they will jump on the bandwagon. I'll guarantee that right now. Over and out.